I'm Bill Hemmer. This is Hemmer Time. Mike Tobin, Senior Correspondent, welcome.
Hey, buddy.
Mike's in Minneapolis watching this trial, and so our listeners are aware we are speaking around noon on Thursday, day 4 of this trial. So many fascinating elements, Mike. We'll try and get through as many as we can and sort of peel back the layers of this trial as you have watched it up close. It's a COVID trial. They have cameras in the courtroom that defies state law, but the judge said because of the pandemic, we want to open it up in this way, which I think has been very interesting because we can see what's happening inside the courtroom. And also in this case, we can see the incident on camera, and there are several views of that. How do you believe the incident with George Floyd, which resulted in his death, has played?
It's very interesting because something I've been covering trials, since 1989. And one thing I've never seen is a murder trial in which there is this abundance of video of the incident itself. Usually with a murder case, you have a body and then they piece together the forensic evidence. Well, you have the incident itself from a number of different angles here. So they're really arguing, was it justified? We all know that George Floyd died in the custody of the Minneapolis police with Derek Chauvin's, or at least he lost consciousness with Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck. That's not in question. It's, was it justified? Was the technique proper? That's really what they're going to have to get at. So they've gone over the video time and time again. It was pretty interesting this morning because they brought George Floyd's girlfriend into the courtroom for testimony today. And a lot of it started to take on the frame of what you normally see with victim impact statements at the end of the trial. She talked about her relationship with George Floyd, the things they like to do together. But then they got into drug use, the fact that both of them were hooked on opiates. And we got a glimmer as to where the prosecution is going to go with this from opening arguments, because we know through the Hennepin County Medical Examiner that there was fentanyl in George Floyd's system. According to the medical examiner's report, 11 nanograms per milliliter, enough that if George Floyd had been found dead alone in his house and no other possible causes, it would have been reasonable to call that an overdose. However, when I talked to an outside forensic pathologist, very well-known guy, Cyril Wecht, he says when you look at the other extraneous factors, the argument of the overdose is not going to fly, primarily because when you have someone who has an overdose on opioids like fentanyl, the same stuff that killed Prince, what happens generally is they slump over and they just stop moving and acting and go to sleep and never wake up again. What you saw very clearly on the videotape is someone who was in a panic, who was thrashing about and fighting until he couldn't fight anymore.
So what could that mean?
It means it's going to be tough for the defense to create doubt. And what they're going to want to create some doubt. They're going to introduce the evidence, as they've made clear, that he had some medical problems. He had an expanded heart. He had blockage in his arteries, and he had this fentanyl in his system. And we all know about fentanyl now, and it's very, very potent and very deadly. But as they try to make that argument, it's going to be something that the prosecution is going to be able to counter.
Yeah.
Then beyond that, we've heard from... Go ahead.
One development that happened today is there was another individual in the car with George Floyd, correct? I believe two, right. In fact. And one is a gentleman who has said that he will take the fifth, which means he will
and that's
not...
Maurice Hall.
Yeah, and why would he want to take the Fifth Amendment?
Well, as we got with the testimony from the girlfriend today, Maurice Hall was their drug dealer. That's who George Floyd and Courtney Ross went to get their opiates. So he has taken the fifth because it looks like he could get in trouble for his participation in this. And why this hurts particularly the defense is that he was expected to, and I get this from the opening arguments from the defense, he was expected to say that George Floyd swallowed pills when the police were approaching in order to hide those pills from the police. And that gets to that argument about whether George Floyd died of an overdose or George Floyd died of a knee on his neck.
Let me come back to that in a moment here, Mike. You mentioned the video, and it's not just the bystanders who are standing there with iPhones or the video camera from across the street. It's also body cam video on behalf of the officers.
Right.
There's just images all over the place of this incident. And I believe it was yesterday, there was body cam video that Derek Chauvin was wearing that fell off and captured audio as it was sitting there on the pavement. And toward the end of the video, when Floyd was taken away, Chauvin is heard saying, that's one person's opinion. We had to control this guy because he's a sizable guy. It looks like he's probably on something. Is that the only time we have heard from Chauvin to date?
Well, you heard a bit from Chauvin when he was having conversations with the other officer, Thomas Lane, saying pretty much, I'm going to do what I'm doing. Thomas Lane had suggested a couple times, should we roll him over? Should we... I think he said, should we roll over and should we check his pulse? I don't have that verbatim. But he suggested doing something else to care for George Floyd. And you heard Derek Chauvin say, no, I got this. Essentially, I'm not quoting directly, but essentially saying, I've got it. I'm in control. And the part you're talking about is when Derek Chauvin was speaking with Charles McMillan. That was the guy who wept on the stand yesterday. He was a bystander who injected himself into the situation, telling George Floyd to stop fighting, telling him that he can't win. But you talk about the video camera, the different angles and the multiple body cameras. I think that Derek Chauvin's body cam shows the least of the 4 different body camera videos because his dropped to the ground. What we see from some of the other officers, what's going to be very interesting when you get into the defense, is what they did. They took George Floyd from over by the Dragon Walk restaurant. They set him down over there because George Floyd was clearly in a panic. They walked him across the street in front of Cup Foods again and tried to put him back in the police SUV. They tried to put him in on the driver's side of the SUV. And George Floyd is clearly in a panic at that point. And that's the first time he says, I can't breathe. He says that long before he's on the ground. And that's going to be an interesting point. But then you also see that the police, they force him into the back seat. George Floyd is bigger and stronger than these guys, and he fights his way through the SUV. And that's why when you ultimately see the video that we're all familiar with, he is on the passenger side of the SUV and down on the street. He fought his way through the SUV, and they pulled him out and put him on the ground.
14 jurors, right? Alternates. 8 of them are white, 6 of them are black or multiracial. 12 deliberate. The judge has not said which 2 will be alternates. Do you have any sense for how this is playing before them in the courtroom?
Well, that's tough. For all the years I've been covering trials, all the reporters love to speculate as far as what the jury is thinking and how they're analyzing the evidence. And I can't remember a time when the reporters speculating on that were right.
Yeah.
But one thing we do know about the jury here is they know of this incident, and they know what happened in Minneapolis. So with the idea that justice is blind, it's going to be tough because they will know the impact of the decision that they make. You saw during the voir dire process that the jurors said they can render an objective decision, but they will still know the magnitude of their decision and what it could mean for the city of Minneapolis. And frankly, the world.
Yeah, there are COVID protocols, as I mentioned at the top of our conversation here. How many people are in the courtroom? Are there a lot of reporters or are there family members?
No, the media is in a separate room. There is one family member who is allowed in every day, and they rotate out. So you've had different members of George Floyd's family in there. And I remember speaking with the sister of George Floyd during open arguments, and they, when the defense started to get into his drug use, she got up and walked out. So it is at times emotional with the family members who are in the courtroom. I'm
guessing there can't be 20 people in there, right? You have 14 jurors, you have a judge, you have attorneys on both sides, and you have the defendant.
I didn't do a head count, but I'd ballpark it right around 20. by the time you have that, because you got the legal teams as well. The state seems to have more of a legal team.
For the full podcast, go to foxnewspodcast.com.